Out the window.
From Derry Quay we sailed away on the 23rd of May. We were boarded by a pleasant crew bound for America. Fresh water there we did take on 5,000 gallons or more, in case we run short going to New York, far away from the Shamrock shore. On Easter Saturday of 1956, along with my parents, I returned to Astoria, New York after spending the first 9.5 years of my life growing up on a farm in the Midlands of Ireland. Now, you know, we all have memories that in our lives, even though they may have taken place many years ago, and in this case, 60 years ago, but they are as clear to us as if they had taken place 5 minutes before. Well, one of my memories, now I grew up in a farm in the Midlands of Ireland. I had almost no restrictions. And this first memory is riding in a cab up through New York City after getting off the ship on Ellis Island, looking out the window of the cab and looking at this immense city of concrete and thinking to myself, where in the name of God have they brought me, and when am I going home? That was my first thought. When we first came back, we lived with my grandaunt Annie Madden. She lived on 35th Avenue between 34th and 35th Street. Now, Annie was a storyteller. Her house is still there. She had a big bay window, and she would look out and she would see the neighborhood people passing, and she would tell me stories about their lives. And she would also tell me stories that were Irish mythological stories, stories of legend. And one day she said to me, "Jimmy, you're not very happy, are you?" I said, "No, Aunt Annie, I'm not very happy. I want to go home. I want to go back to Ireland." She said to me, "Jimmy, you know all those stories that I told you? And many times people in their lives face crises and difficulties. But if they're patient and persevere, that many times things will change and you'll become happy in your new world." Well, I knew exactly what my Aunt Annie was getting at, but for the time I just wasn't buying this. I was a lonely and angry kid. Now, eventually we moved up to 44th Street between 30th and 31st Avenues. And my first I'm up there, outside, throwing a Spalding ball up against the wall. A kid comes along to me and says, "Hey kid, what time is it?" And as I said, I wasn't in a very good mood. I was an angry kid. So in my defiant Irish accent, I said, "It's 3:30. Well, the kid stopped, looked at me in amazement, started to laugh. And then he went around the corner and he brought back a whole bunch of his friends. And he said, "You gotta hear this kid talk." Well, for the next 5 or 10 minutes, I was peppered with all sorts of questions just so they could hear me talk. Well, now, if I was in the right frame of mind and could have seen the humor in this, I would have been able to laugh along with them. But I was an angry kid. So at one point, I got so angry, I drew out and I struck one of my tormentors. Well, this started a series of fights between myself and the other kids in the block. And my poor mother, she worked in the Steinway piano factory down at the end of Steinway Street, way down. Every day she would come home and there would be a line outside of our house. Mrs. Hawkins, Jimmy punched me in the arm. Jimmy kicked me in the shins. Jimmy stole my stickball bats. And it went on and on. I started to get a reputation as a tough kid on the block, but I wasn't really. And then one day, the real tough kid on the block, Jerry Lacey, comes up to me and says, "Hey, I hear you're giving my friends a hard time." "Yeah, and what are you going to do about it?" Well, before I knew what happened, Jerry hit me a shot right between the eyes. I went down like a wounded animal. I did get up and I got a few shots in my defense, but somewhere in the middle of that fight, my mind said, you know, this isn't a very healthy thing to be doing. You should stop doing this. And that basically ended my fighting career. And in time, Jerry Lacey and the other kids and myself, we solved our differences and we became friends. And as my grand aunt Annie said, I came to love growing up in Astoria. Now 44th Street, and it's still the same way today, there is a stoop on every house. And on the weekends in particular, people were out on the stoops chatting, talking, and so forth. Now, I could come down onto my stoop and I could look at all of the games that were being played on the block. There was stoop ball, box ball, stick ball. All of them played with one of these, except that it was pink. I looked around for a pink one. I had difficulty. But anyhow, there was this, okay, rubber ball, and they were priceless as far as we kids were for us. They were priceless because you could play anything with them. The greatest game of them all for us kids, for us guys, baseball. Now, when I first came here, I had no interest in baseball whatsoever. My head was still back in Ireland and I was thinking about Irish hurling and football matches. But baseball was all over Astoria, and the ongoing discussion all the time was, who is the best center fielder in New York? Was it the Say Hey Kid, Willie Mays of the New York Giants? Was it the Duke of Flatbush, Duke Snyder of the Brooklyn Dodgers? Or was it the mighty Mickey Mantle of the New York Yankees? As I said, I didn't pay too much attention to this. But one day, we're in the schoolyard during recess and this argument is flooding. Finally, one of my friends turns around to me and says, "Jimmy, who do you think is the best of the three?" As I said, I had no interest in baseball. However, my literary side must have been growing even then. And I thought, Mickey Mantle, Mickey Mantle, Mickey Mantle. I loved hearing the words coming out of my mouth and flowing out of my mouth. And so, Mickey Mantle became my baseball and sports hero. And in 1961, along with Roger Maris, they were known as the M&M Boys. They staged one of the greatest contests in the history of baseball, a summer-long home run marathon to see if either one or both of them could equal or surpass Babe Ruth's record of 60 home runs. It was a magical summer for all of us, children and adults. And on the weekends, people would be out on their stoops and somebody would run a line out and there would be radios on each of the stoops and we could hear the games regardless of where we were on the block. Roger Maris hit number 61 on the last day of the season off a pitcher called Tracy Stallard of the Boston Red Sox. The Mick finished with 58. But I will always believe that if he hadn't got hurt in the last 2 weeks of the season, he would have equaled Roger's record or surpassed it. And in my mind, Roger Maris will always be the king of baseball. There were no steroids in that man's blood. Now, our other heroes came from the comic books that we bought in Pat Lahaff's candy store. There was Batman, Batwoman, Superman, Superwoman, and of course my favorite, the cowboy heroes. Roy Rogers, Dale Evans, Sky King, and then the greatest of them all. And I'm going to ask you right now to make believe that you are part of an orchestra. And together we are going to hum. Do you all know the William Tell Overture? Everybody know that one? Okay, on the count of three, all right? 1, 2, 3. Hi-oh, Silver, a fiery horse, a breed of light, and a hearty hi-oh, Silver. The Lone Ranger rides again. I always thought there was something tremendously noble, admirable about a man who lost everything, including his family, in an Indian raid, and decided to don a mask, and along with his friend Tonto, he went about the country seeking to bring justice wherever he could. Now, some of us had an obsession about the Lone Ranger. We used to play softball every Saturday morning in the park on PS 10 on 45th Street. At 1:15 exactly, regardless of where we were in the game, we put down our bats, balls, our sticks, and we went home to watch the next episode of The Lone Ranger that was on from 1:30 to 2 o'clock on Channel 11. Then we came back with our lunches, sat down, and analyzed or critiqued the latest episode of The Lone Ranger. Now, I mentioned to you that we got our comic books in Pat Lahaff's candy store. That's what they were called then. I guess it's sort of like convenience store today. Pat's store was on 44th Street on the corner of 31st Avenue. To go into that store was a magical place for a kid. You walked in the door, and over here there was a long counter. And I don't know if you know the kind of stools where they would twist around and you could roll yourself around. Well, they had stools all along there. Well, from that counter, you could get any kind of ice cream imaginable, any kind of soda. I had a love for vanilla egg creams. And over here were all the places where there were the comic books. And here, you name the kind of ball that a kid would like, and Pat Lahaff would make sure he had it. Whether it was a basketball, football, handball, whatever it was, Pat would get it. And of course, he also had the papers and other things for adults. Now, Pat Lahaff was a giant in our community. Physically, he stood over 6 feet in height and weighed well over 200 pounds. But more importantly, he was a giant to us people. Pat knew everybody. He was friendly with everybody. He always had a joke or a smile. Not because he necessarily wanted you to come to in for his business, which he did, but that was his nature. And I remember Pat probably had the first form of credit card that we ever had. It was a black and white notebook. And he would put people's names in and what they owed. And when they got their paychecks, in some cases people got paid twice a week, sometimes they got paid maybe once a month. And I'd hear people say, Pat, put it in the notebook, right, Mary? And of course, when they got their pay, they came in and they paid. And all the years that I worked for Pat, I never heard him have an argument with anyone. Now, I worked for him when I was in high school on the weekends. He would have me put the newspapers together for Sunday. At that time, there was about 6 newspapers. And sometimes I'd work behind the counter, and sometimes he'd have me bringing soda down the cellar. Now, Pat loved to tease everybody, and I was one of his #1 targets. I was very shy, especially when it came to girls. So many times if I was working on a Saturday night and a girl came in who happened to be about my age, Pat would say, Maureen, you know Jimmy Hawkins over there, don't you? He's working awfully hard tonight. Why don't you go over there and keep him company? Or, Deirdre, Jimmy is looking a little sad tonight. I don't know what's wrong. Go over there and give him a hug. And of course I would get beet red and make a mad dash for the cellar. And I could hear Pat's laughter and the girls' laughter following me down the stairs. The morning that Pat Lahab died, there was not a single seat in St. Joseph's Church. My cousin Mike and his family still live on 25th Street between 44th and 45th Street. And before I go home, I tried to drive down 44th Street between 30th and 31st Avenue. The block is basically the same. I mean, the stores have changed, the names and so forth, but St. Joseph's Church is there on the corner. The stoops are there. Now there are different kids on the stoops, but probably many of them immigrant kids like myself. But they're not playing box ball or stick ball or handball. They're now playing iTunes, iPads, something or other. But if there is no car behind me, very slowly as we go down that block, and as I do, the memories of my past come to me. Why don't we play stickball today? Hey kid, what time is it? There it goes, a deep drive to left field. Mickey Mantle has done it again. Hi-yo, Silver. Jimmy? Maureen is coming over here to sit with you for a while. I get to the end of the block on 44th Street and 31st Avenue. I make a right-hand turn. I drive approximately 12 blocks down to my Aunt Annie's house, and it's still there. That bay window has been modernized, but it's still there. I get out of the car and I look. And sometimes I think I can almost see her. And she opens up the window and looks out to me and says, Jimmy, come on in. I have another Astoria story to tell you. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Well, I put down roots on shifting sands, but avalanches keep on washing me down. Down to the river, back to the start, out to the wide blue ocean coast. Now I put down roots on shifting sands, but avalanches keep on washing me down. Down to the river, back to the start, out to the wide blue ocean coast. I turn back around 'cause I'm heading right for the source. Go down to the river and back to the start, out to the wide blue ocean coast. I turn back around 'cause I'm heading right for the source.